Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. I'm so happy to see your face. Yeah. And also during the events, maybe we will take some snapshot of the events for our newsletter. So everyone, please show your happy and excited face. Okay, I think we can start right now. Welcome everyone again. Today we will have an interview session with Kristina about from product management to CEO, how to pave a career in tech. Afterwards, we will also have a Q&A session, so be prepared to shoot questions later. In the beginning, I would like to introduce Kristina. Kristina has over 12 years of digital experience, and now she's the CEO and the former CPO at Nuri. Before she started her role at Nuri, she has worked at N26 and Zalando during their hypergrowth stages. At N26, she was a product lead, and at Zalando, she was in the loyalty and mobile apps team, where she delivered the customer-centric solutions and drove the mobile man side within Zalando's various departments. So welcome, Kristina. It's really lovely to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And yeah, thanks to all of you as a team for organizing it and inviting me.
Yeah. Okay, I think I will start right with the topics. So could you please tell us a little bit about what inspired you to become a product manager in tech at the beginning of your career?
Good question. I also had to think a little bit about it when you gave me this question, because I think I cannot even remember how often I said I don't want to be a product manager, and now look at where I am, and I became one. So I mean, between my bachelor and my master's, I actually spent a year in management consulting, and I really liked solving problems. I liked solving, understanding like, okay, what is currently now the client's issue, and then actually work together with the team and like helping them solve them, help them to overcome challenges. And often this will obviously like business challenges of companies, and then also help them to actually, define a strategy, how to get there, how to solve their challenges. And I think that was something that really, that's something I really fell in love with, because I really love solving problems. I love solving obstacles or removing obstacles. However, the environment I found myself in was not the right for me, right? I really loved the work, and I also felt like I'm really good in like strategic work and like, detecting problems, like, and actually observing the real problem and not what people usually think the problem is. However, the environment, again, like it was a bit old school, and I'm like, okay, if I have to sit here for the next 40 years of my life, I'm gonna be very unhappy. So I thought, okay, then my master started, and initially I was working there still as a freelancer, but then I thought, hey, if I already know, like I don't want to continue working here after my master's, why not use this time, like during my studies now, to actually learn something else. And before that, I worked in like cost management and in a tax consulting and so on and so forth. And all of that was like not my thing. So, and what I didn't really like in university in general was marketing. Like I actually absolutely hated it, because I studied in Berlin, and in a public university, marketing is just multiple choice. Like you don't learn anything meaningful. We learned marketing with like Pampers advertisement of the 70s, like it was super old school. So I never really got into marketing. But then a friend of mine told me that he actually joined an agency, and they're actually doing mobile marketing. But back then, mobile marketing in 2009 or 10, it actually meant building mobile websites or building mobile apps. So in the end, it was not really mobile marketing how we understand it today, where it's like really about optimizing and like, app store optimization and like performance marketing and so on and so forth. Back then, it really meant using mobile as a marketing channel. And so I actually thought, cool, I was always interested in like new technologies, like smartphones, which is around. And I thought, okay, I mean, maybe I just asked them if I can go there in my semester break and do an internship there. And that was Icon Mobile back then. So I joined them, and in my, like, I think first or second day, my boss already took me in a meeting. I can remember it was a meeting with O2, and we were about to build an app for O2. But remember, that was 2010. the iPhone was just around, and Android was a nerd platform. And we had to build BlackBerry apps, because usually the executives of those companies and those large brands that were building that stuff for were all on BlackBerry. And so I was super excited. So actually we sat down, we understand what kind of strategic goal did O2 have, like why did they even want to build an app? And it was a lot of strategic work actually involved before we defined what this app should be about. And this is like how I really learned to use the strategic skills, the analyzing skills, like what is the actual problem on the business side? Why should a consumer even download the app? Like what kind of value do we want to create for a customer? This is how I actually started to learn about this thinking, and then how you use technology or how an app to actually solve those problems or achieve goals from a business perspective. And that was just my first weeks there. And I was absolutely thrilled. And I was like, oh my God, this can be consulting as well. Like this can be strategic work. This is amazing. And then after I think the internship was only maybe 2 months, they have asked me if I want to stay as a part-time employee. And in my master's, I didn't have so much university. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I can work here for 20, maybe 30 hours. And then from that moment on, I was absolutely thrilled, because in uni, in my master's, I could really focus on like strategy and like that part that actually really served me moving forward. I also went into like financial management and banking. I don't know what the exact name was. It was like about finance and banking. So I just picked stuff where I felt, okay, this can be meaningful for my career later. But in the end, like the majority of my time, I literally spent working at Icon Mobile and delivering apps already, like really sitting together with designers a lot, trying to understand user problems, trying to understand how new technologies can solve business problems, or even can make business processes more efficient. It was really about a lot more about understanding before you come up with great app ideas, right? And I really learned that just brainstorming app ideas is not helping anyone. It's really about just doing the discovery beforehand. Yeah, and that was something. And then when I was actually done with my study, so I built a lot of apps for them together with the tech team and the designers. I obviously also helped them a lot with like pitching, also for like large companies back then, like Procter & Gamble and so on, because back then still, when a company wanted to have an app, you as an agency would basically pitch. And so it was really also about like showing them our working process and so on and so forth. So I also learned a little bit how to break down projects that you can sell them, like what are the convincing points, how can we differentiate ourselves, how we build products instead of just offering fancy ideas in a presentation, because there was more to it. And this is in the end how I started to build mobile apps. The most funny app we actually built back then was the Stefan Marquardt cooking slot machine. Stefan Marquardt is kind of a punk rock cook or chef, and he wanted to build a really cool app, actually. I believe it was a really cool app, that he had a slot machine and you could shake your mobile phone, and then basically you had the 3 slots in the slot machine. The first one was the main ingredient, like beef. Then you had a side ingredient like potatoes, and then you had a special spice, I don't know, chili. And then basically you could shake your app, and then based on these 3 ingredients, they would show you recipes. It was a fun app. I don't know. It was 2011. We built this kind of app still back then.
Really fascinating. And I think for us, it's also we are in the early stage of our career. When we face interviews, we often been asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So Kristina, have you ever planned to become a CEO in your early career stages, or even 5 years before, let's say? And how those product development experience advanced or helped you to achieve a position as a CEO?
Absolutely not. It was never my goal to become a CEO. Even if you would ask me 2 years ago, I would have said no. Even when I was asked, I said no, because I really fell in love with like product management. And once you join a great company like Zalando or like N26, or it's product management means something completely different than on an agency side, right? And for me, I really fell in love with like product. I loved helping younger colleagues to fall in love with product as I did, like teaching them how to become a better product person. And if you would have asked me, I always thought, okay, I'm becoming a CPO. That's what happened with me and Nuri, or back then we were still called Bitwala. But then I would have also, I always thought of becoming rather a CPO of a cool brand like Spotify or something like that, But then, yeah, things can change so quickly, because like when I was asked if I want to take over as a CEO, and that, by the way, only happened after 3 months being in the role of a CPO, like everything changes, you know, because you have two choices. You either do it or you're not going to do it. And none of them is really great, because on the one side, if you don't take this role, the person that hired you is not going to be there, and the whole dynamics in your C-level group is going to be very different, and maybe the new vision, and with a new person you might not be aligned with their vision of the company. So that's a big risk, a big question mark. But then again, if I've never planned for it, that's why I never, you know, tried to acquire specific skills for being a CEO. I didn't even know what a CEO really does. I always thought it's a lot of like spreadsheets involved. But then I actually also learned, okay, I'm not going to figure it out if I not try it out. And what I already told myself was the worst thing that could happen, that I'm not going to be so super successful. But in the end, I always knew, or that's at least what I told myself, if people would judge me, that after 3 months in my first C-level role, and then even being brave enough to take the CEO role, if this doesn't work out, I always said, like, the people should rather say she's so brave because she tried it, and whoever says something else can F off.
Yeah, it's indeed true. I think we all need to have the courage to take all the challenge, or even like just a new opportunity in our life. And we all know there are always challenge in our career. And have you ever, like, let's say, what was the biggest challenge in your career so far? Or was there any moment that you even thought about quitting? And how did you overcome it in the end?
I think it was exactly that phase, you know, because you join a company, you believe, great, now this is my time to learn, because I've given so much in my roles before as a middle manager, always like coaching younger people and so on and so forth. And I'm like, you know what, this is now my step up. I want to come here to this company, and it's a startup, it's challenging enough, but I want to learn how to become a good C-level executive. And then from one day to another, someone says, okay, can you take over? Otherwise, we're going to look for someone else. And this was the moment where I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And then even once I decided that I'm going to give it a try, it's very hard in the beginning, because like you have to define the role for yourself. In a CEO role, everyone does that role so differently, and you have to define it yourself. And you're constantly, I've been confronted, like with, like until today, I'm no more than 1 year in the role, and literally every week something happens that like I never had to deal with before. And sometimes it can be very challenging. And sometimes as a CEO, you know, no one is motivating you. You constantly give energy. You give energy to your employees. You give energy to your investors, because even if they are struggling with, you know, some things not going as expected, and like, you know, they're also struggling. So you also have to convince them, you know what, it's not so bad. We're going to figure it out. So you're constantly just giving, giving, giving. And there are times if you don't take care of yourself, like you need to make sure to fill up your cup, you know, to bring the energy back, because otherwise it's too much, you know. And I think that's, especially for it being first time in a role, I think it's like the first time in a leadership role, right? You have to take care of yourself. And this is the challenge that I think that everyone goes through, because in my opinion as well, because we had so much PR once I was in this role. So suddenly, like, you're in the cover of a Handelsblatt, yes, and a lot of people would think, oh my god, this is so great, Kristina. But the first moment when I saw it, I was like, oh my god, this is so much pressure for me, because now if I don't want to, like, if something happens or whatever, I decide that I don't want to do this role anymore, it's out there, you know. So I always felt like this is the challenge, that I need to make myself independent from the external view, and only like listen to myself. How do I feel today? And do I need a break? And if yes, I need to take that break, because no one will tell you you have to take a break. You have to take, but then again, you know, it's the first time, you want to do everything perfect. I think that's how we women are. We always want to do the extra role, want to show the world that we can be a great CEO. And I think this is something I really definitely have, or still probably have to learn a bit, to say, you know what, it's okay, I have a weekend now, and I'm gonna take my weekend. And I think that's maybe the moments when you like lack energy. These are the moments when it would be easy to quit. But the thing is, if you quit and you go into the next role and you don't work it through right now, you will have the same pattern in your next role. So it's rather have this role and learn how to do it in a more healthy manner, because then it doesn't matter what kind of role you have. Otherwise, you just jump from role to role, and whenever it gets hard, you run away, and it doesn't matter, because then it doesn't matter what kind of role you have.
Definitely. I think we are all like ambitious business people, and never never quitting is a important mentality to have. And but we all know in technology as well as in financial industry, it's very male dominated field. I would like to ask, have you ever experienced any gender bias in your career, and how did you overcome it? Or if you have any learned lesson to give the young ladies here in their early careers?
Before I blame others, I start with blaming myself, because even though I'm a woman, I'm not free from having unconscious bias, right? And I can remember, and during my times at Zalando, I mean, obviously work constantly with the tech team, and I needed to align something with very like deep technical backend stuff. And I came into the room, and there was this young lady sitting there, maybe beginning of her 20s, super like small, tiny. I'm also very small though. But I saw her sitting there, and I'm very honest, I thought, my first thought was like, is someone coming here that like understands that stuff? And that was my own thought. I mean, in the moment, I was very aware that I thought that I was like, oh my God, Kristina, if this happens to you, like, and this was very unconscious again, you know. I mean, at this moment I realized it, that I thought it, but in the end, I thought, if this happens to me, because obviously I grew up with those cliches myself, that, you know, women like to play with puppets and the guys are like programming with a computer, and girls do marketing versus the boys doing tech stuff, whatever. If I think that as a woman working in tech, discussing backend topics, how bad is it really, right? Because I mean, I was self-aware enough, because we did a lot of workshops about like unconscious gender bias and so on and so forth. But if I'm not free from that, like, there's a lot of work to do, right? And I think that was for me a very eye-opener, because I didn't mean anything bad to this lady, and she was very smart, and actually she knew a lot about the topic, by the way. But I think it starts with all of us, right? And that's why have a lot of, like, I have more empathy now when sometimes I'm in a room and there's like at least also elderly men that say weird things to me, like when I speak at a conference, for example, and like people come to me afterwards, and I think they just want to congratulate me and actually want to give me a positive feedback, but they say so many things where I'm like, thanks, I know you would never say that to a man, but thank you, because I believe they really mean well. And I try to I try to explain it to people in the respective manner, if I do have the feeling it makes sense right now, to just say, you know what, I think here you could change something. And I think I personally, do I have experienced it? Most likely, right? Because I'm working in the tech scene, I'm also a small woman. And I think often we do things differently. Women just approach things differently. We do things differently. And either this is seen as something good or it's not as seen as something good. But then you probably cannot change it, because we have to break up these patterns. And I very personally stopped to try to fight the environment I'm in, because I don't believe often it's just a wasted energy. I try to find environments where we can change things, because now I'm in a company where I can lead a company, I can scale a company, I can show that I can run a successful company, and that's worth way more than I try to suffer in an environment that doesn't let me succeed. You know what I mean? And I've been there. I've been there where I had the feeling I couldn't succeed, and you have to leave those places, because it's a waste of energy, because you can use the energy somewhere else and create something great.
Yeah, I do agree. Like, we all have unconscious bias, whatever character background or ethic, even gender, and it exists there, and it's very important for us to be aware of it and learning from it. And I also do believe many people doesn't do the stereotype for bad purpose. Maybe it just happened.
Yeah.
And
we run a lot of in our company, for example, we run unconscious bias interview trainings. So whoever is doing job interviews needs to go through an unconscious bias training, because again, you know, if you hire a developer or a lead position, it's very important that the people interviewing is free from that, or is at least aware. But also if we give each other performance feedback within the company, obviously we have a performance cycle every second week, twice a year. And then people also need to go through unconscious bias training, because I believe that's the first step, right? Creating awareness, giving examples so people can learn from it.
Yeah, thanks a lot about the gender bias topic. I think many of the audience are also very interested into the blockchain, because really a hot topic nowadays, and blockchain technology can also be integrated into multiple areas. I think we can talk about hours for this, but to bring everyone here in the same page, could you please leverage a little bit about how exactly blockchain is changing the finance industry, specifically how are fintechs impacting the traditional financial service firms?
Yeah, so I think right now, for example, let's take a very the most common example maybe, right? Like payments, for example, at the moment they take forever. With blockchain, you can send almost instant payments, right? And I think this is something that needs to change, because we live in a very global world. And if you order something from Asia, which is produced in just-in-time production, with overnight delivery, it might be even at your place with express delivery in like 1 or maximum 2 days, but often the payment takes a week. How can that be possible? The other day, it's a real life example again. I ordered something on Amazon. It was there the next day, but I waited at the same time for a bank transfer, which took me like 4 days, because it was sent on a Thursday and it only arrived on a Monday or Tuesday. So I think instant payments are like instant settlements are like one example of the blockchain. But I think also there's especially blockchain is basically a decentralized ledger, so to say. And what it helps us to do is in the end also offer, let's say, trustless transactions. And I think that's also quite a big benefit of the blockchain technology. So you basically everything is like transparent, like transactions are like highly transparent. And you don't need, in order to approve a transaction, you don't need to trust the person anymore. You don't need intermediaries anymore. You can just do it like automatically, and like everything is like being recorded in a decentralized way, so to say. And I think right now, still in the financial world, a lot of things need to be approved like very manually. If you think about like buying a stock today, even though if you see now the trading platforms, it all seems like so digital interfaces, but in the background, there's a lot of stamping and notary game going on. Like you just don't see it, but that's why also often things just take a few days because things need to be approved and like even confirmed with a notary and paper and stamps and so on. Also, like everything is like very regulated on a local level. I think at least theoretically, like with things like Bitcoin, for example, is the first time that we can send like cross-border payments, but also people can, for example, hold or get access to their currencies in a very independent manner. So no one can have access to those wallets, right? So for example, Bitcoin has often been held in a non-custodial way where people hold their own keys. So they're the only ones who had access to the wallets. We personally, like at Nuri, we don't suggest this for mainstream users to do because we see too many people losing those keys. But if you think now about Ukraine, Russia, for example, or even like South America, like maybe economies that are not as stable as here in the Western world, that's quite a powerful use case when people need to run away from their country or accounts cannot get frozen, for example. And I think these things are just like very important to consider in a world context. But obviously here in the Western world, I think it's more the trustless way of interacting. Smart contracts, for example, on the Ethereum platform, again, allow us also to borrow against digital assets in a very efficient manner. So they can replace something like a Lombard loan. So yeah, there's tons of use cases as well where trustless interactions, trustless transactions can create a lot of efficiencies, but also cut out a lot of intermediaries and thus ultimately reduce cost.
I saw Valentina has raised the hand. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask on what you just said, Kristina. Super interesting, but isn't that also like one of the big risks that we're seeing right now as well, that accounts can't get frozen, like when we're talking about sanctions and so on? I mean, to be honest, I didn't read too much into it. I probably should have, but like how I understood some of the headlines, it's in like today's geopolitical situation, making it a little bit hard to like enforce certain sanctions to the extent that maybe people want to enforce them too, because of the whole anonymity and so on. So just was wondering like what your thought on like the other side of the coin is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can, that's a very fair point, because you can see it from one way or the other. Because yes, indeed, you can go around sanctions, but then on the other side, it can also mean basically that, let's take the role of women in some economies, like where women don't have any rights. For them, it can be the only way, for example, to actually like build up to a certain degree a little bit of wealth and some of lead the country and run away from suppression, so to say. I think all these things, there's always risk, and risk is always the opposite of chance, so to say, right? And I think there might be use cases that are not super beneficial, but then there's from a world context perspective, I think in general, like decentralization as such, indeed has great responsibilities. And I think indeed also through the high level of transparency of the blockchain, you can at least follow through all the transactions and where they actually go, because everything is basically trackable on the blockchain. And I think all the transactions are basically immutable. And I think this is the big benefit of it. And that's why also things like doing, for example, money laundering or terrorist financing through digital assets on the blockchain obviously doesn't absolutely make sense, because of the traceability, so to say.
Yeah, cool. I think you just mentioned it before, like investor relationship management is like a core skill set CEO need to have. And concerning FinTech, what are the main difference between the US and the German market, and also the investor climate you have experienced? Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
That's a very interesting one. So first of all, I would say the US market in terms of investing in the German market or in general European market is very different. To just throw in some facts, right? Within Europe, if you look into all the financial assets within Europe, not even 30%, I think it's 29 something, not even 30% are currently invested in equities and securities. In Germany, that's only 24%, versus in the US, it's 54%. So you can already see like more than half of the assets in the US is invested in equities and securities versus 24% in Germany. So you see already like Germans and in general Europeans are rather very risk averse. We're a savers region. We only have now to learn to invest. I think that the trauma with the Germans started with the Deutsche Telekom stock. Maybe you can remember that time. I don't know if it was in the 90s or in like in the 0s. I was way younger. And like the Telekom stock, the Volksaktie, as we say in German, was launched. And then as Germans were not used to invest, I think what mainstream people do, they invest very irrational. So they bought stocks, the price went down and everyone sold and everyone lost a lot of money. And I think this was a big trauma of the Germans. That's why we have such a hard time now to get back into investing in general. Whereas the US in general, they're more, I would say, more used to investments, more risk affine. And this is also something that you can obviously then now, if you talk first about like maybe the regulatory environment, Germany is very like our regulator is one of the strictest here in Europe, if not the strictest. So if you compare that also with regulation in the US, which is not as strictly regulated, especially when it comes to crypto, for example. I mean, they're just now start to actually build out their crypto regulation. They have a few state-based regulations, but it's very scattered across the US. Now, when we also talk about investors, I think this all somehow belongs a little bit together because it's the same, right? As a Series B company or a Series A company in Germany, if you speak to a German investor, they're often like very quickly like, oh, show me your revenues. When can you be profitable? Versus US investors are rather, show me crazy user growth. And like, they don't like really dive so deep into your revenues, like even at the stage of our company, I think where revenues start to become fairly relevant, we hear that from a lot of investors, they not care about that at all, because they just want to see that you have strong user growth, that you basically gain market share, and that your user base is active. So activity for US investment is way more important, because they have the strong belief, as long as you have a huge user base, you have a significant market share, which is active, you can monetize later. So it's a little bit how they're thinking, right? Their horizons are way longer and they're way more bullish, whereas Germans or Europeans in general, I would say Germans more conservative than the rest of the Europeans. They want to rather see is like, oh, is this become profitable? Like, can I have more security that this is going to be a thing? They will always want to reduce their risk. But I think that's a little bit our culture, right? So we rather believe in sustainable growth. We don't like things which are oversold and over bullish, and like also the valuations that are currently happening in the fintech market. I mean, the question is how sustainable that is, right? Because now we see already in the fintech market, the valuations went down indeed. As the public market is going down, I think this is usually an indicator that the valuations in startups as well are going down, and the private market like a few months later. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting with the interesting valuations we have with German fintechs, and what comes out of that, like, right? And if they really ever manage to actually monetize their customers, like how sustainable these developments will be and how sustainable these valuations will turn out. I'm watching that with great curiosity, but you can definitely see that US Americans are interested in slightly different KPIs and slightly different developments of the company, and more bullish and less conservative.
Yeah, really, really fascinating to see the difference between two different markets. And now I think we will move to the Q&A session, and anyone will have question, please unmute yourself or even type your question in the chat. And yeah, now feel free to ask anything you are interested into.
Yeah, I just have one question. I raised my hand already. Thank you for taking us through your career journey and what are you doing nowadays. I just wanted to know, like, I see like the Nuri is, it's actually like you have a collaboration with Solaris Bank. Could you please describe your relationship with Solaris Bank, and how does your let's say like this blockchain thing, is this something that Nuri is actually actively doing, or is this something with collaboration with Solaris Bank? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically what we're doing is we are a neobank, and we combine a very traditional bank account, which basically mainly serves the managing or the spending money part, together with wealth and investment products. So we initially started to basically combine a bank account with crypto. So we offer Bitcoin and Ether. You can buy basically Bitcoin and Ether right from your bank account. We offer the possibility that you can put your Bitcoin into a Bitcoin interest account and achieve, in general, between 3 and 4% of interest, which is great because in your traditional savings account, you don't receive interest. Now we're about also to launch an ETF product as a digital asset. So it's going to be a security token. It's going to be basically a digital asset as an ETF. And then we're also going to launch a DeFi product later this year. So basically Solaris Bank is providing us with the traditional bank account. So they provide us with the IBAN and like with the whole KYC process, and with, let's say, all the banking main functionality, like doing bank transfers, receiving direct debit, and so on and so forth. And also officially we are trading in the name of Solaris Bank, because we're not like, we don't have our own banking license yet. We're basically acting under the banking license of Solaris Bank, which is, Solaris is basically a white label banking as a service provider.
And the blockchain thing that you described is,
so
is this
blockchain, basically what we offer in the blockchain, on the one side we offer cryptocurrencies, which is basically blockchain, but then we also offer a Bitcoin interest account, so people can move their Bitcoin into an interest account and then receive interest. And now we're actually basically launching an ETF product, which is a security token. So it's going to be also, it's a token on the Ethereum platform, so which has basically been traded like on chain. And then we're also currently building a DeFi product. So DeFi means decentralized finance. That basically means It's basically a decentralized, let's say there's a lot of decentralized services, for example, where you can lend out your stablecoins and then receive yield for it. So it's basically a very similar mechanism than if you use a traditional savings account. In a traditional savings account, right, you give your euro, your fiat money to the bank, and the bank is basically using your money to like give out credits, and this is how they generate interest, and they give you back a certain part of interest. And the same thing happens actually if you lend out stablecoins in the decentralized environment. The big difference is that there's no centralized player like a bank. It just goes into a pool. So stablecoins are just, let's say, the digital representation, for example, of a US dollar or of a euro. So they don't have a volatility like Bitcoin. They're just one-to-one replicating the US dollar or a euro. So now if you're in this world, you don't have volatility anymore, but you can basically lend out your coins in a decentralized protocol, which is basically taking the role a bit of a bank, because it's in the end a smart contract or a protocol that basically then lends and borrows stablecoins to people or institutions that want to borrow credit. And this is where you get interest for, like, or yield as it's called in the DeFi world. And it basically is a similar mechanism as a savings account. But the yield rate is basically not defined by a central institution like the central bank, but it's just based on offer and demand. And yeah, that's basically how the crypto geeks as of today already generate often 15-20% of yield. And we're gonna basically want to offer in the end yield on euro by basically abstracting all these complex steps for the user, and just offer them like around 4% on euro. So we generate this yield or interest for them. So it's basically also a product based on decentralized finance. But Solaris itself, they offer a very traditional bank account, which is not very blockchain, is very traditional old school bank account based on Mambu. It's a fairly new banking core system. And then they also offer us with the custodial wallets. So Solaris Digital Assets is basically, they offers custodial wallets. So there you can hold your crypto, for example, your Bitcoin, like in a bank account. Because as I mentioned before, in crypto, there are non-custodial wallets where you own your key and no one can access it. But the problem is if you lose your keys, even we cannot restore that. We cannot help you because we don't have access to it. If you store them in a custodial wallet setup, then Solaris Digital Assets is basically the custodian to hold them for you. But then if you lose your password, we can restore your password and give you access, like online banking, basically, just that they take care of your crypto. And this is also what they offer.
Okay, just one question again, that a traditional bank, for example, offers, for example, security up to, or let's say like an insurance up to 100,000. So is that valid? How is that valid for cryptocurrencies? Then if Solaris Bank, if for example you were supposed to lose the key, let's put it like that.
Yeah. Well, if you lose your key anyways, no one can access it because you own your private keys, so nothing can happen. But if you put your Bitcoin in a custodian wallet where Solaris Digital Assets is responsible for, theoretically, if Solaris Digital Assets get hacked, then your cryptos are gone. So that's the main difference, and they're not protected up to 100K. Up to the 100K deposit insurance is only available for spending accounts, like checking accounts and saving accounts, very traditional ones, but not for investment, any type of investment product, so to say.
Okay, I think I will give some time to other people who has questions. I think next is Francisca. Raise the hand first. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Actually, my question is more about the topic of diversity and particularly the gender quotas in board of directors. So this is kind of a controversial topic, and I know even for women that sometimes they think that these people should be chosen based on merit and competence. At the same time, though, when things don't happen spontaneously, it's probably right that the government step in with laws on that. So I'm curious about your opinion on this topic.
It's a very good question because I also find it not an easy way to answer. And versus initially, I would argue the same way. Like if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have also said, you know what? Good people will reach the top but this is absolutely not the truth. And you might be very surprised how many people are sitting in like top positions where like, what? But so what I saw, I give you a very concrete example, which was very eye-opening to me. Why I believe we need a quota, and we don't need it forever. We need it for a certain period of time until it becomes just very normal and the statistics have improved. So I give you, like the other day, I was recruiting for a chief product officer. So I worked together with an executive search, like that's an agency that basically finds people for you. So the deal was they're gonna, like, I give them the requirements for what I need, and I always said like, oh my god, if you could replace that with a woman, because I was a woman, if we can find another woman, it would be amazing. And they said yes, they're gonna look, it's hard. And I'm like, yeah, it's hard. So then they came back with a short list of 10 people, and it was 100% men. And then I said, you know what, guys, we don't have to go through that list. I think you can just keep your list, and you can come back if you find like a list that's 50% female and 50% male. Otherwise, we don't have to do this meeting. And actually it took them 2 days, and they came back and had 50% top-notch chief product officer profiles, even in Berlin for sometimes. I'm like, where did you find all these amazing women in chief product officer like levels? So suddenly, if you push them, they could find the women, right? But it's very true, because in product and tech in general, statistically, there's less women. And yes, it takes maybe 2 days more work to find them. But if you put on the 2 days more work, you can find them and you find the list. And you know what? After like a lot of interviews and stuff like that, I would have loved to hire women. Like they mostly dropped out of the process at some point because they got a promotion internally. In the end, we hired a man, right? And it's fine because we really did everything we could. But in the end, like it took me a lot of times all over again to say, like, whenever you give me a list, I want to have 50% male, 50% women. And don't bring me just women. They need to be like skilled. They need to be interested in the role. They need to be interested in us as a company. Even like crypto is even worse, I can tell you. But obviously it was possible, you know. And I think then out of different reasons, if the last person then that you actually want to hire is a man, then it's what it is, right? And I'm not saying we shouldn't hire men anymore. But what I want to say is, if I wouldn't have pushed back many times, like for their shortlists, we wouldn't have even interviewed women. And this is a problem. And I think this is something that we can do, because again, it's easier. It's always statistically easier to find men, because if you look into the experience, there's just statistically more men. There's probably 80% men, 20% women. And not everyone is going after these 20% women, obviously. And there's also women, as much as they're a man, which I'm, in my opinion, often sometimes not capable of in a position. I think it's even worse to put women in a position which are not there yet. And then everyone can say, oh my God, she failed, you know? And for a lot of women, that would be the absolute difference, because you would put her there and everyone would say, you're sure? But then she would actually like absolutely overwhelm you. But yeah, that's why I believe the quota is, for maybe 20 years, very important. But I think in 15, 20 years, we might have overcome that, and it's just very normal.
Yeah, I think Kai is next raised the hand.
Yeah, thank you, Kristina, for this great story. I was probably also wondering, because you as a product obsessed person, if you can share probably your key learnings, how to build a great product, because probably also some of us were thinking about to do probably their own startup, and how to build a great product that customers love.
Very easy question. So I think the most important thing is, do your research, try to get something in front of customers and try to validate it as soon as possible. Because you need to learn, and like whatever you build, it's not going to be successful in most likely in all of the cases. So you need to constantly iterate and like adjust something, move on. Therefore, I think it's important that you really know your target group, you know psychologically what their fears are, what their concerns are, and why they're not using a certain product or not like using a certain product. You need to understand a little bit how their lives look like, because that's also very important to understand a little bit what the product or what kind of role the product needs to fulfill. But then also you obviously need to make sure that you can make money with it. And I think both things are equally important, and you need to get real validation for that very early on. And it's often easy to tend to fall back to qualitative interviews. So that means like you talk to 5 people and 7 people. And it's good to get like first hints, but you always also need to validate it at scale. So you always need to do qualitative insights, but a qualitative insight is not a validation at scale, right? It gives you deeper insights into maybe some assumptions, but you need to always like validate things at scale. And focus on like one big problem that you want to solve, and don't try to solve 70 problems at the same time, because in the end gonna need funding, right? And I think everyone wants to see that you're solving a problem but 10 times better than your competition. The 10 times is actually very important because people are very lazy and they don't want to switch so often. Yeah, I think also showing that you somehow can monetize on your product very early on is also important, because otherwise it's hard also to get funding, right? I mean, seed funding, sometimes you can get that fairly easy, for some topics not. Also keep in mind, I'm currently in a board of a startup that really struggles to get seed funding, and I fundamentally believe in the product because it's a big topic. But the problem is that no VC has dived into this industry so far. And this is the feedback what they get, right? So there's no exit case, they haven't done the research in the industry. And then it's also very hard to get funding for something where no one has kind of a, in German, we have the saying to put like you're in a certain box or in a certain drawer, and people like VCs want to put you in a box. They want to put you in a box. They want to have something comparable, because in the end, they always need to convince someone else that your investment is important. And therefore, it's very important as well that you somehow pick an industry where there's somehow comparison. I think also what I found as well, that in Germany itself, people are very keen when it comes to B2B SaaS, but B2C products in general, there's not a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of experience, I would say. And I mean, we do have a few great cases, right? We have HelloFresh, we have Delivery Hero, we have Zalando, we have Trade Republic. I don't know, like we have a few players. But in general, I would say German investors, depends a little bit where you want to start, are rather familiar with B2B and SaaS businesses.
Yeah, cool. And if I can follow up on this, so in which industry would you start if you could start again, or would you start again? Also in the FinTech business, or are you seeing any interesting cases right now on the horizon?
Very good question. Where would I start?
Because everybody's doing blockchain
like
right now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kai. History doesn't like what ifs. It's a very tricky question. I mean, you know, if you ask about what ifs.
I would most likely at this point in time, maybe because it's really my passion, is really traveling. And I've optimized so many things when it comes to traveling for myself, because I really like to go in very exotic regions where no one has ever been before and like find my way through. And I would like to make this more accessible for the mainstream, because already so many people are usually asking me, can you give me tips, but how you actually find this stuff out? And it's a lot of research that you have to do. And yeah, maybe it would be around the travel industry, to do something where I don't mind, you know, if it reaches 1 million customers, because obviously right now I'm really thinking in the growth mindset, and like it's a different kind of working. But I would at some point just do a product which is purely where I basically built for myself, because I often believe if you solve problems for yourself, you might become also very successful for others. Maybe, but maybe also not, because a product without users is just a hobby. But I would actually try to solve that hobby for myself. Yeah. And I believe travel is now, again, as travel had a really tough time for the past 2 years, I guess it's a very increasing industry in the next 2-3 years, because people are so hungry to go out and experience again.
Definitely. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Kristina.
And another one, I also still believe in virtual worlds. Like, now when it comes to virtual worlds, I believe renting luxury goods in virtual worlds is going to be really a big thing, because renting luxury goods, especially here in Germany, I mean, when can you ever wear Chanel handbag here? I mean, maybe in Frankfurt, not so much in Berlin. But I believe in virtual worlds, people might not buy that stuff because it's just too expensive and it's a waste of money. But maybe still they want to show off in kind of virtual concerts or something like that. And if it's a cheap way to rent luxury goods, I really believe there's a big use case in virtual worlds for renting luxury goods.
Yeah, we'll check that out. Thanks.
I think next is Young.
Yes, I think virtual worlds in general, virtual experience is going to be very big.
Okay, my question is regarding the regulations, because many Bitcoiners are really concerned that Germany and maybe even the whole European Union is going to cut themselves out from that new market. And so I'd like to hear your opinion on that, and if maybe Nuri does something to make an impact on politics.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because you were always a little bit tight in between. Again, risk again is the opposite of or is the opposite of chance, right? And if you speak to the real Bitcoiners, I mean, they really believe in like highest levels of decentralization and absolute ownership of keys, like holding their crypto in non-custodial wallets and so on, versus providing services for mainstream consumer as we're doing has different challenges, right? Because if our customers hold all their Bitcoin in non-custodial wallets, I can tell you a lot of them are losing their keys, and then they hate us because we cannot restore their keys, but we just can't, because that's the idea of the system. So I still believe, first of all, I believe regulation still is important, and it's also important in Europe because it creates a fair playing field for everyone. And I think it creates a rather certain environment for everyone. So because, you know, whatever you build, it can be approved by BaFin, and then yeah, you basically have planning security as a business as well, as opposite, like you build something and then like the regulation changes and then suddenly you cannot offer your services anymore. But I also believe what we're currently doing is often indeed keeping us away from innovation in Web3, in DeFi as well. I mean, the travel rule is a good example. Like, I think the problem is that regulation should always, on the one side, should happen after you have a certain critical mass and usage, because then only you know how people are using certain things, and then you can even regulate it. And I think probably we're there now. But now what should happen is also gremiums with like experts from the scene and discussing the pros and the cons, right? And very early on, before this regulation went through, there were like a few roundtables. But I think this dialogue, also understanding the impacts on the market, have not happened like very transparently and very publicly. And we're actually doing something like that. I was just about to sign a paper now to actually sending also a letter to the EU Commission and so on and so forth. Because on the one side, I think the German regulator has become way stricter. And I think cases like Wirecard playing into that, obviously. Also cases like N26 now, like not taking the whole compliance AML topics very seriously. These are all things why BaFin in general gets more strict and more strict and more strict, in combination of maybe also, it's like DeFi, it's a very new topic still, you know, and understanding the possibilities and also the risk is very important. Especially regulation has the sole purpose of indeed also protecting the end consumer, right? And we're a mainstream product. We want to serve the mainstream user that often doesn't know the risks. So that's why we believe regulation is important, but sometimes it could be better informed beforehand. So you can find better ways of regulation and better ways of setting those up, because there's, especially in the blockchain, which is like absolutely traceable, there might be better ways to deal with like transaction monitoring, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Poti, do you go ahead?
Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat by Bob, so I'll just read it out for Kristina. So so the second question is, what Nuri is doing seems to be similar with some other fintech companies are doing, such as Vivid. So how does Nuri differentiate itself from its other competitors?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the question is always like, what is currently the regulatory about? So for example, now the travel rule itself is not directly influencing us. It might indirectly influence like some partners or some services that we'll build upon, right? So here in detail, we shall see like who's in the end like affected by this regulation, but we directly are currently not affected, but obviously the services that we use. And the problem is that at some point we might be forced to rather use services that are not coming from the EU, just to kind of offer certain services. And I think at some point we, again, lack the innovation here in the country. And I think this is also what happens. Like we already missed a lot of innovation when it comes to Web 2, because if you look into your apps in the phone, I guess 90% or 95% of the apps that you use on a daily basis are not coming from Europe. So now the question is, do we actually want to lose out on like Web3 as well? And then in the end, like make sure that the services that we can use are not coming from Europe as well. I guess this is the biggest risk that we currently see. And yes, there might be some services that we could not offer that are on our roadmap indeed. But here, I think the regulation coming up is a little bit unclear, because the MiCA regulations in general like is highly inspired by the German regulation on crypto, which had a very progressive role initially. So there's a blockchain initiative by the German government. There's the Electronic Securities Act. There's a lot of good stuff happening as well here in Germany. I mean, I don't want to like also hide that. But I just believe by all the current suggestions that are currently moving forward, they're not really solving the problem, right? And I think also, for example, around Bitcoin, there was also some topics about like Bitcoin mining, or should even Bitcoin be like illegal in the EU, and so on and so forth, like whatever there's coming up, often in some side conversations. There are things that would make sense, for example, that Bitcoin mining shall only be allowed in a sustainable manner. Like there are ways where you can do meaningful regulations, but yeah, I guess the dialogue between the industry and between the politicians is missing. And I think there's a lot of great players here in Germany, for example, Katharina Gera, also a great name, being also very active in the space and like really searching this dialogue with the German government. And let me go to the second question. What Nuri is doing is similar with other fintech companies that are doing, such as Vivid. How does it differentiate itself from other competitors? Well, I mean, first of all, Vivid is not offering real crypto, so they're offering like CFD. So it's slightly different. And also Vivid, for example, and thus as they're not offering real crypto, they could not offer, for example, services like Bitcoin interest accounts. And this is exactly what Nuri is more about. We're not just a trading platform or a financial marketplace as Revolut or as Vivid, because they're rather, you can think of them rather as an eBay for financial products. They rather innovate on the distribution layer, but they're not really innovating and constructing and handcrafting financial products. And this is what we're now focusing on, right? We don't believe that just offering raw assets to the customer is solving the problem that Germans don't know how to invest. So we're rather trying to build saving alternatives by diversifying different portfolios and really building real saving account alternatives, obviously based on investment products. Could be the stock market, it could be the DeFi market. And I guess this is the main difference between them and us, because I think the DeFi yield product that I talked about, like offering yield on euro, is something where it requires not only very deep crypto and DeFi knowledge, which is already very hard to find, but also you need to put the crypto DeFi people in a room with very old school bankers that understand regulation, and investment people that really understand how to build up investment strategies and backtesting and so on and so forth. And like these three parties together create basically your moat, because in Germany you do not innovate if you don't have the respective regulatory staff in-house that has stellar connections to the regulator.
Benji, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thank you very much. I think due to the time limitation, we have to end here, unfortunately. I would love to talk with you all for a couple hours, but unfortunately, we only have 1 hour have been allocated here for having the conversation here. But our conversation does continue online. If you follow our LinkedIn or Instagram, please really keep the conversation going. And also feel free to use this opportunity to network and connect with people tuned in today. And I would like to give a big thank you to Kristina. It was really wonderful discussion. Thank you very much, Kristina.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you all for everyone who tuned in, and thank you all who sent the question. And please follow us on the social media and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you all. Looking forward to see you all in our next event, and have a good time.
Wendy, before we hang up, is it okay if everybody can just take a turn on their cameras for a quick group picture?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Everyone, please switch on your camera, and we will
If possible, we would truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for switching on your camera, guys. I'll be the one taking the screenshot.
Jessica's here.
Yeah, Jessica here, down with COVID, but let me try to say hi to everyone. Hi. Okay, cool. So if anyone else can switch on your camera, just 10 seconds, guys. Don't worry. Cool. Okay. Okay. Your biggest smile in 3, 2, 1. Cool. Another one. 3, 2, 1. Cool. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Kristina. Thanks so much, everyone. Stay tuned for our event in 2 days' time to meet all the board, and we can have Q&A and everything. I won't be there, but Purti will be there to answer all your questions. And thanks so much, Kristina. We look forward to meeting you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.